My name is Eli Jacobs, and I swear to you, my life is like an over-caffeinated screenwriter's fever dream. I'm 37 now, but 8 years ago, my parents kicked me out of their lives with all the subtlety of a trash collector on a tight schedule. My crime? I told them I was dropping out of law school to launch a software company. My father, the Honorable Judge Robert Jacobs, who can quote property code in his sleep but can't remember my birthday, looked at me like I'd confessed to strangling a puppy. He said I was throwing my future in the gutter. My mother, Linda, clutched her pearls, literally, and asked if I'd been experimenting with drugs. They made it clear I was an embarrassment to their curated, country club existence. So I left. Not dramatically, no door slamming or movie monologue. Just me, a duffel bag, and a polite, "I'll see myself out." I didn't see them for almost a decade. In those years, I did exactly what they said I couldn't. My little, frivolous project became Glasshouse Systems, a software firm worth more than their combined investments, and then some. And once it sold, I did the most cliché Silicon Valley thing I could think of. I bought a vineyard. I know. I'm aware of how that sounds. But I wanted a place where no one would lecture me about optics. A place where the loudest thing was birds, not my mother's sigh of disappointment. That morning, I was walking the rows of vines, coffee in hand, feeling the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes only when you know your parents have no idea how well you've done without them. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I should have let it go to voicemail. But there's this tiny masochistic streak in me, the part that likes poking old bruises to see if they still hurt. So I answered. "Eli?" Her voice. High and pinched, like she'd been sucking lemons all morning. "Mom," I said, neutral. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We have wonderful news," she began, her tone dripping with the sugary poison she reserves for conversations where she's about to demand something outrageous. "Megan is engaged. To Brandon Pierce. You remember Brandon, don't you?" "Ah, yes. Brandon Pierce. The trust fund lumber heir who once told me, 'Computers are a fad.' A real visionary." "Sure," I said. "The guy who thinks a modem is a type of fish." She ignored me. "They'll be married here, at your vineyard. June 10th. It's all settled." I actually pulled the phone away to make sure I'd heard that correctly. "You're informing me?" A huffy sigh. "Eli, this isn't about you. This is about family. Megan deserves a beautiful venue, and your property will lend just the right atmosphere of what?" I cut in. "The atmosphere of the son you disowned because you didn't want your friends to know I exist?" Her voice went flat. "I am not going to argue about ancient history. The invitations are printed. The caterer is booked. You will, of course, accommodate us." I took a deep, steadying breath. The vineyard stretched around me, my vines, my land, bought with money she claimed I'd never have. And for the first time in years, I felt that familiar, prickling rage, only this time it wasn't mixed with shame. "No," I said. A silence as cold as the Oregon wind. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated. "That's not happening." The sugary tone vanished like a magic trick. "You selfish little boy," she spat. "This is why we cut you off. You've always been petty. You will not embarrass this family in front of the Pierces. Do you understand me?" "I'm sorry," I said brightly. "Did you think you were talking to the Eli who used to pay rent with coins out of his car cup holder? He doesn't live here anymore." And I hung up. The quiet after was delicious. Like the first clean breath after leaving a stuffy room. But I knew my mother. She wouldn't let this go. She'd already sent those invitations, probably with a smug little note about how our vineyard is a perfect backdrop. She was banking on me caving, on the same guilt that had once kept me up at night. I looked around. The vineyard felt more mine than ever. If they thought they could just waltz back into my life and commandeer my home, they were about to learn that I had become everything they feared: successful, stubborn, and absolutely unwilling to be their stage prop. After I hung up on my mother, I stood there in the vines, phone still in my hand, the sun turning the dew on the leaves into tiny mirrors. Part of me expected her to call back immediately, to scream or cry or unleash whatever combination of emotional blackmail she thought might work. But there was nothing. Just the quiet and the taste of old adrenaline on my tongue. I should have felt relief. But mostly I felt a dull, exasperated ache. Because I knew she wasn't going to drop it. My mother has never accepted a no that didn't come with a notarized letter and a court order. I was right. 3 hours later, I was in my office, going over payroll, when my phone buzzed again. This time it was my sister, Megan. I hadn't heard her voice in 8 years. Not since the day she stood on the porch watching me load my suitcase into the back of my old Civic, arms crossed over her chest, wearing that same disapproving smirk she must have been born with. I let it ring until voicemail picked up. I'd barely set the phone down when it rang again. And again. On the 5th call, I gave up and answered. Eli, she began, her voice sugary in a way that made me want to laugh. Mom said you were confused about the plans? Not confused, I said. Just unwilling. A little huff of annoyance. Eli, don't do this. It's one day. You have all this space, she said, as if space was a synonym for reason to bow to her entitlement. You mean my property, I corrected. Oh my God, Eli, she snapped, dropping the sweet act in a heartbeat. Do you have any idea how selfish you sound? You've always needed to make everything about you. This is my wedding. My future. All we're asking is for you to be gracious. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Once, her words would have stung, would have made me question whether I was the problem. Not anymore. Megan, I said slowly, I don't owe you anything. I don't owe you a single inch of this land. You're unbelievable, she hissed. After everything Mom and Dad did for you. I laughed then. A short, humorless sound. You mean after they threw me out because I wouldn't pretend to be the son they wanted? There was silence. Then she tried again, the way she always did, switching tactics as fast as she could. Fine, she said, voice trembling with false hurt. If you really want to humiliate the family, go ahead. But know that you'll regret this. We'll just have to make alternate arrangements. Good luck with that, I said and ended the call. I set my phone down carefully, as if it might explode. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from a cold, righteous fury. I went to the kitchen and made coffee I didn't want, just to have something to do with my hands. When I returned, there was an email waiting in my inbox. Subject: Re-event confirmation, Jacob's Vineyard. From events@vineyard.com. I frowned, clicked it open. Dear Mr. Jacobs, we're following up on the reservation for June 10th, as discussed with your family. Attached is the final estimate for the catering and rental services. As a courtesy reminder, we'll need your deposit by end of day tomorrow to secure staffing for the 250 expected guests. Warmly, Emma Clark. Vine and Table Events. My heart thumped once, heavy and sick. 250 guests. They weren't bluffing. They were really going to show up. I scrolled down and there it was, an itemized list of services: catering, floral arrangements, live music, valet parking. All to be held on my land. No signature from me. No approval. I sat back, exhaled slowly, and for the first time, I smiled. Because it hit me then, this was the proof. The receipt of their entitlement. And if they thought they could stage a social coup on my property, they had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with now. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, Nina Patel, with one sentence. We need to talk. Nina had been handling my contracts ever since I bought the vineyard. She was whip-smart, ferociously organized, and had zero patience for people who thought their family name exempted them from consequences. She called within 10 minutes. You sound calm, she said, voice dry. Should I be concerned? I'm past fury, I told her. I've reached an elevated plane of irritation. She laughed. Walk me through it. I did. Every word. The call from my mother, Megan's threats, the email. I could hear her typing in the background, the rapid-fire clicks of someone assembling a legal nuclear device. Do you have any written authorization for them to use your property? She asked. No. They're just assuming I'll cave. Perfect, she said. First thing tomorrow, I'll draft a formal cease and desist. They'll be notified in writing that any attempt to access your land will be trespassing. And if they show up anyway, I will be delighted to file for an injunction, Nina said, her voice bright with the thrill of pending litigation. But if you want to guarantee they don't set foot on the property, I'd recommend you do something proactive. Like? Book the date yourself. Rent it out. Fill it with witnesses. Make sure there's no conceivable way they can pretend it was available. I felt a grin start at the back of my throat. You're suggesting I host my own event? I'm suggesting, she said, that you create an ironclad record. If they still tried to crash it, they'll be trespassing on video, in front of 100 people. No judge in this state will side with them. Any recommendations? Call your favorite nonprofit, she said. Make a donation. Lend them the space for the day. Bonus points if it's something your parents can't stand. I thought about it. And I knew exactly who to call. That afternoon, I drove into town and parked in front of a small brick building painted with a bright mural. The Haven Center, a local LGBTQ+ youth nonprofit I'd quietly supported since moving here. Inside, the director, Rosa Morales, was pacing in her tiny office. She looked up, surprised. Eli. Everything okay? Better than okay, I said and sat down. I told her the short version, the wedding invasion, the entitlement, the threats. I left out the petty parts, but she was smart enough to see the subtext. Rosa listened, her eyebrows climbing higher with every sentence. Well, she said finally. I thought my mom was overbearing, but this is Olympic level. Here's my idea, I said. The Haven Summer Gala, wasn't that scheduled for the end of June? She nodded cautiously. What if you held it here instead? On June 10th? Her jaw dropped. You're offering the Vineyard? For free, I said. Full access all day. I'll cover catering, parking, security. Whatever you need. Rosa's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. You don't have to do this just because your family is. Oh, I'm not doing it just because of them, I said. But I won't pretend it doesn't feel poetic. She burst out laughing. Deal, she said, holding out her hand. When I drove home, my phone buzzed again, this time, a text from Megan. Megan, since you're refusing to act like an adult, we'll be proceeding as planned. The caterers are confirmed. I'll have the coordinator call you to discuss deliveries. I read it twice, then shook my head. Some people don't learn until the lesson is televised. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of my own Riesling and watched the sun slip behind the hills. I thought about how much had changed since the day I left home. Back then, I'd have felt guilty. Panicked. Desperate to smooth it over. Now, I couldn't wait to watch them realize the world didn't revolve around their expectations anymore. The following morning, I woke up to find 3 new emails from Megan and 2 from my mother. All of them had that same saccharine tone of people who think if they speak in bullet points, you'll somehow forget they have no authority over you. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I forwarded them straight to Nina. Within the hour, she replied with a draft of the cease and desist. To Linda and Megan Jacobs. This letter serves as formal notice that any attempt to enter or utilize the property located at Willow Run Vineyard on June 10th will constitute trespassing. No permission, express or implied, has been granted. Any further communication must be directed to my office. Reading it felt like stepping into the warm bath of long overdue boundaries. I signed it electronically, hit send, and leaned back in my chair. For a moment, I let myself imagine how they'd react when they opened it. My mother, eyes wide with outrage. My sister, clutching her phone in disbelief that the world dared say no to her. It was a pleasant thought. That afternoon, I drove out to meet Rosa and her team to finalize the gala logistics. When I pulled up, she was standing near the main barn with 2 volunteers, waving a clipboard like a conductor's baton. Eli, she called, beaming. You're a legend. I held up a hand. Please save the compliments for when you see the invoice. What of the volunteers? A wiry kid with a nose ring and a t-shirt that said "Queer Joy is Revolutionary" grinned at me. "Your family really tried to commandeer your property for a wedding?" "Apparently," I said. They thought my silence meant agreement. Rosa shook her head. "Entitlement is a hell of a drug." We walked the grounds together, mapping out where the stage and tents would go. Every detail felt like a deliberate declaration that this land belonged to me, and that I would decide who it welcomed. "Do you want the big lawn cleared?" Rosa asked, tapping her clipboard. "We're thinking of putting the banner there." "Yes," I said, picturing my mother's expression. "Absolutely." I didn't say what I was really thinking, that I wanted the banner visible from the road, so when the limousines inevitably tried to drive up, they'd be greeted by a 30-foot sign that read, "Pride in the Vines, June 10th. It was, in a word, perfect. By the time I got home, Nina had emailed again. Subject response from opposing counsel. I clicked it open. Eli. As anticipated, their attorney, some junior partner at a family law firm, claims you misunderstood the situation, and that your sister is proceeding with wedding preparations. I'll handle them. In the meantime, do nothing. Let them walk straight into their own mess. I couldn't help it. I laughed out loud. Because it was all so predictable. They'd spent their entire lives assuming the rest of us would absorb their decisions without question. That if they spoke with enough authority, reality would bend around them. But this time, reality had lawyers, and a signed contract with a nonprofit, and a permit from the county, and security staff trained in politely escorting trespassers off the premises. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and called my best friend Arlo, who'd been my roommate back when all I could afford was a mattress on the floor of a damp studio apartment. When I told him the story, he let out a long, low whistle. "Dude," he said, "this is the most satisfying midlife crisis I've ever heard of." "It's not a crisis," I corrected. "It's a midlife clarification," he cackled. "Well, when you're standing there watching them get turned away at the gate, think of me." "Oh," I said, "I'm planning to have it recorded. For posterity." "God, I love you." "Mutual," I said, smiling. And as we hung up, I realized that for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't dreading what came next. I was looking forward to it. June 10th dawned like the opening act of a Shakespearean farce. The sky was a flawless, early summer blue, the vineyard glowing in the morning sun. Volunteers in bright t-shirts were unloading tables and rainbow bunting from rental trucks. The caterer, an exuberant woman named Lacey who looked like she could run a military campaign armed only with canapes, was barking orders over a walkie-talkie. It was exactly the kind of chaos my mother would have sniffed at in disdain. Perfect. I stood on the wraparound porch with my coffee, watching the transformation unfold. My home was becoming a celebration of everything my parents pretended didn't exist: color, inclusivity, community. At 11 a.m., Rosa found me inspecting the setup. She looked equal parts overwhelmed and delighted. "Eli," she said, "I owe you about 50 thank yous, but I'm too busy to say them all." "Consider them accepted in advance," I said deadpan. She grinned. A text buzzed on my phone, breaking the moment. "Unknown number. We're on our way. Be ready." I didn't need a signature to know who it was. My mother, deploying her threat like she thought it was a tactical nuke. I showed Rosa the screen. "Should we be worried?" she asked, brows raised. "Only for their pride," I said. At precisely 1:30 p.m., I got the first visual confirmation that the invasion force had arrived. A convoy of black SUVs and 2 white stretch limos turned up the gravel drive like a scene from a budget crime thriller. I exhaled slowly. My heart thumped once hard. Not fear, just anticipation. Rosa joined me by the gate, clipboard in hand. A few volunteers gathered behind her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and barely restrained glee. The lead limo door opened. My mother emerged in a pale pink suit, hat pinned into place like she was auditioning for a royal wedding b-roll. Her mouth set in a line so thin it looked like it might snap off her face. My father climbed out next, wearing the same glowering expression he'd perfected over decades on the bench. And then Megan stepped out, draped in an ivory gown so over the top it looked like it needed its own zip code. They didn't see me at first. They were too busy gawking at the rainbow flags, the pride banners, the long rows of tables already filled with guests in bright colors and high spirits. Finally, my mother's gaze snapped to mine. "Eli!" she shrieked, her voice slicing across the courtyard. "What is this?" I stepped forward, hands in my pockets, my tone as mild as I could make it. "A community fundraiser," I called back. "The Haven Center's summer gala. You're trespassing. You selfish bastard," she spat, advancing toward the gate. "You think you can humiliate us? You think this spectacle is going to stop anything?" I held up my phone. "Nina Patel, my attorney, would like me to remind you that this is legally reserved, and any attempt to cross this gate will result in immediate police involvement." My father's face turned an interesting shade of maroon. "This is your sister's wedding day," he thundered. "Do you have any idea how many important people are coming? You will let us through." Behind them, more cars were arriving, guests in formal wear stepping out, bewildered at the sight of a pride event instead of white chairs and flower arrangements. It was like watching the air hiss out of a giant balloon. Then Megan stepped forward, her hands balled into fists. "You always had to ruin everything," she hissed, loud enough for the volunteers to hear. "You couldn't stand that I was finally getting what I deserved." "You mean someone else's property?" I asked, raising my eyebrows. "You never deserved this. You assumed it." She shook her head, trembling. "I hope you're happy," she said, voice breaking. "I hope you enjoy being alone." A sad little part of me might have flinched at that once. But I wasn't 18 anymore. "I'm not alone," I said simply. I turned and gestured to the tables behind me, filled with laughing guests, people hugging, people clinking glasses. "This is my family now," I said. My mother made one last lunge for the gate, but two security guards in polo shirts stepped smoothly into her path. "Ma'am," one of them said calmly, "you need to return to your vehicle." She opened her mouth to argue, but the guests were starting to take photos. Someone was recording on their phone. And I knew exactly how much she hated public embarrassment. My father's shoulders sagged. He reached for her arm. "Come on," he said hoarsely. For a moment, she looked like she'd rather combust on the spot. But finally, she turned back to the limo, her spine ramrod straight. Megan didn't follow. She looked at me one last time, her eyes glassy. "I hope you choke on this," she whispered. Then she turned, gathering her skirts, and climbed back into the car. I watched the convoy reverse down the drive, tires crunching on gravel. Rosa exhaled beside me. "Well," she murmured, "that was a lot." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Yeah," I said. "But it was exactly what needed to happen." The convoy of limousines finally disappeared down the road, leaving only the dust and the faint smell of overheated egos. For a moment I just stood there, the quiet settling around me like a soft blanket. Rosa and her volunteers were watching me, wide-eyed, like I'd just performed a live exorcism. I let out a slow breath and turned back toward the lawn. "Okay," I said, clapping my hands once. "Let's get back to the fun part." They erupted in relieved laughter, the tension dissolving like morning fog. By 3 p.m., the gala was in full swing. The courtyard was a riot of color, banners fluttering in the breeze, tables piled high with food, music drifting from the speakers. Guests wandered the vines, glasses of Riesling in hand, greeting each other like old friends. If you told me 10 years ago that my vineyard would one day host an LGBTQ+ fundraiser on the very day my family tried to stage their social spectacle, I'd have called you delusional. But looking around, I realized I couldn't have planned a better counterpoint. At one point, Rosa came up beside me with a glass of sparkling water. "You okay?" she asked gently. "Yeah," I said, surprised to find it was true. "I really am." "Good," she said. "Because I have a feeling this story is going to become local legend." I raised an eyebrow. "Already?" She grinned. "Eli, half the people here watched them get turned away at the gate. And I'm pretty sure at least 3 people live-streamed it." I shook my head, laughing. "My mother is going to have an aneurysm." Rosa lifted her glass in a toast. To setting boundaries. I clinked mine against hers. To not caring who doesn't like them. A little after 5, my phone buzzed again. I glanced down, expecting more threats. Instead, it was a single message from Megan. I hope you're proud of yourself. I didn't reply. Because I was. Just after sunset, I slipped away to the porch to catch my breath. The vineyard stretched out under the fading light, all soft gold and deep green. Arlo called as I was watching the last of the guests dance near the tent. Dude, he said without preamble. You are officially my hero. Big day, I admitted. Big day? You turned your sister's wedding into a pride gala. You realize how legendary that is? I rubbed a hand over my face. I didn't do it to be legendary. I did it because they needed to understand this is mine. Yeah, he said, voice softening. And because you're not the kid they threw out anymore. I swallowed, feeling something loosen in my chest. Yeah, I echoed. That too. When the last guests finally left, Rosa hugged me tight. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. I didn't have words. So I just nodded. And as I stood there, listening to the crickets in the vines, I realized the day hadn't been about revenge as much as it had been about reclamation. This place. My life. My story. It all belonged to me again. The next morning, I woke up to a phone vibrating itself off my nightstand. I squinted at the screen. 23 missed calls. 3 from my father. 7 from Megan. 13 from my mother. That felt about right. I set the phone face down. I wasn't ready to let their outrage infect my first quiet morning in weeks. Instead, I walked outside, coffee in hand, and took in the aftermath. The courtyard was littered with rainbow streamers and stray cocktail napkins. A few volunteers were already back, gathering up folding chairs and stacking catering trays. Rosa waved at me from across the lawn. Good morning, she called. Sleep well? Like a rock, I said truthfully. While I helped her load boxes into a van, one of the volunteers, a college kid with a purple undercut, sidled up to me. Was that really your family yesterday? They asked wide-eyed. I sighed. Unfortunately, yes. They shook their head with an expression of solemn awe. Iconic, they whispered. And you know what? It kind of was. By noon, the last of the equipment had been hauled away. The vineyard looked like itself again, quiet rows of vines, the breeze carrying the faint scent of earth and late summer blossoms. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt something I couldn't quite name, a clean, cool emptiness, like a room finally cleared of junk. That afternoon, Nina called. Thought you'd want an update, she said briskly. Let me guess, I drawled. They're threatening to sue me for emotional distress? Close, she said. Their attorney emailed this morning. They're demanding reimbursement for the deposits on the wedding vendors. They're claiming you maliciously interfered with their plans. I barked a laugh so sudden I nearly choked down my coffee. Are you serious? Serious as a migraine, Nina confirmed. I already drafted a response. In short, no. Perfect, I said. She paused. And Eli, if they escalate, we'll handle it. You don't need to answer a single call or email. Something in my chest unclenched. Thanks, Nina. Anytime, she said. Go enjoy your vineyard. Later that evening, I sat on the porch, legs propped up on the railing, watching the last light drain out of the sky. A text buzzed on my phone. Arlo again. Did they try to storm the gates today, or are they licking their wounds in silence? Silence, I replied. Mostly. You okay? I looked around. The land was quiet. The air smelled like sage and ripe grapes. For the first time in my life, my family's approval, or their outrage, felt utterly irrelevant. Yeah, I typed back. I'm really okay. I poured myself a glass of Syrah from the newest barrels. The first vintage that felt like it carried my name without apology. As I raised the glass, I thought of the boy I used to be, the one who would have caved, who would have spent years trying to be worthy of people determined not to see him. I imagined telling him, "It's going to hurt. But one day you won't care. And that freedom will feel better than their acceptance ever could. And for once, I believed it completely. A week later, a letter arrived. Heavy cream envelope, my father's handwriting. I almost laughed. I opened it standing in the kitchen. Eli. Your mother insisted I write. What happened was regrettable. Megan was under pressure. We hoped you'd understand we did what we had to do to preserve our reputation. You've made your point. Maybe someday you'll reconsider speaking to us. Dad. I folded it once, dropped it straight into the recycling bin, and poured myself a glass of wine. That night Arlo and I sat on the porch watching the last light fade over the vineyard. Any regrets? He asked. I thought about it. About every voicemail, every guilt trip, every time they called me selfish for not being what they wanted. And then I smiled. Yeah, I said. That I didn't do it sooner.